today's topic, we're going to be talking about the 5 stones of David. And the 5 stones of David are lessons we're going to talk about your purpose. These 5 lessons, we're going to, as I'm ministering today, you're going to hear me refer to these lessons as stones. So lesson 1 be stone number 1, so forth up to number 5. When David fought Goliath, he had 5 smooth stones that he chosen from the brook. And what we're going to get today are 5 lessons that we can also throw at the enemy when he's trying to stop us from pursuing our purpose that God has given us. I pray that you get something out of it, it blesses you, and that we were able to apply this thing to our lives and go forth in what God has called us all to do. We're going to take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 17. And we're going to start. Let's start at. Now, Samuel 17 is like 58 verse, so it's a very lengthy chapter. So I don't want to, sit and read the whole thing. So we're kind of going to bounce through it just a little bit and give you some ideas of what's going on. Let's start at verse 20. But between verses 1 and 19, David was the youngest of his brothers. The older 3 brothers went off to war with Saul to fight against the Philistines. So his father, Jesse, had told David, take this bread and go give it to your brothers and also check on them to make sure they're doing okay during this wartime. And also gave him like 10 different cheeses to give to his captains. So that's kind of what went on between verses 1 and 19. We're going to start at verse 20. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. So here David is going forth and doing what his father Jesse had told him to do, go check on his brothers that were going into war. Basically what's going on right now, the Israel army and the Philistines, they're both set up, they're getting ready to go to battle. When we could drop down a little bit, I want to, again, read the whole thing to you. We all pretty much know the story of David and Goliath, about what went on. And I'm not trying to bore him, I don't want to speak in a monotone voice and sit here and put you to sleep or anything like that. So we just kind of got to, again, bounce through it just a little bit. We're going to go down to, we're going to go again to 23. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up a champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to some of the words. And David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Here we see that the armies there, Israel army there, just totally terrified of Goliath, knowing that this giant can take any of them out at any given time. And let's drop down to verse 32. And here's we're going to read a little bit more, then we're going to go back and look at the 5 different stones, the lessons that we're going to learn about your purpose. Verse 32, And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he be a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defiled the armies of the living God. David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off of him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest unto me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh to the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defiled. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistines arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut his head off therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose, and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley, unto the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way of Sharaim, even unto Gath, and to Ekron. And we're going to stop right there. We're going to go back and look at these 5 stones that I was telling you about. The title again is The 5 Stones of David. 5 lessons we're going to learn while in the pursuit of your purpose. First thing we need to know, what is purpose? The definition of purpose is the object toward which one strives, or for which something exists. Why did God create you? What is your purpose? Why are you here? As believers, we all generally have the same purpose. The end result of our purpose is just like in Matthew chapter 1. Take a look there real quick, and we'll just go over that. I can read it to you. I appreciate y'all still being awake, because I know it's kind of a little lengthy reading we just did, and I hope I didn't, nobody yawned, so that's a beautiful thing, and I appreciate it. The end result of every believer's purpose is the same. It's the same purpose that Joseph had in Matthew chapter 1. Basically what went on, Joseph was engaged to be married to Mary, and then he found out that she was pregnant. When he found out she was pregnant, he thought about, putting her away and not marrying her, but he wanted to do it privately so he wouldn't embarrass her, because in those days, a woman who was pregnant wasn't married, they would actually kill her. So he decided to put her away privately. He went to sleep. Angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said, Joseph, look, she's pregnant, but she's pregnant by the Holy Spirit, so it's okay for you to go ahead and marry her, still be with her. But when the baby that she has is born, you are to name him Jesus. When Jesus was born, Joseph said, hey, look, when the doctor asked him, hey, what are we going to name this baby? Joseph said his name is Jesus. But when Joseph said that the baby's name is Jesus, in essence, what he just said is that God is with us and that the Savior is here. So all of our purposes are the exact same thing. The end result is that it is our purpose for us to introduce the world to Christ. Now, the way we do it will vary. He'll call some to be pastors, some to be preachers, some to be doctors, lawyers. He'll call some to be business owners. He'll call them to be writers, authors of books. There's going to be some that will be singers and musicians. But still, in all of what we do, the end result is for us to introduce the world to Christ. That's the end result of all of our purpose. In Jeremiah 1:5, the Lord said this about Jeremiah. Before Jeremiah was formed in his mother's belly, God knew Jeremiah, and God was also knew that what he wanted Jeremiah to be. So God sanctified Jeremiah, and he wanted him to be a prophet. The same thing with us. Before we were formed in our mother's wombs, God had a plan for our lives. He knew exactly what our purpose was to be on this earth. Now today I don't want to talk necessarily about finding your purpose. I believe everyone here has heard from God. If not all, most have heard from God about what it is that he wants us to do. So what I want to talk about is while you knowing your purpose on how to pursue that purpose that God has given you. Okay? Again, the 5 stones of David. So as we read in 1 Samuel, we're going to go back now and look at the 5 stones, the 5 lessons that we're going to learn about purpose. The first lesson, or the first stone, number 1, will be found in verse 33. And it says, "And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." Stone number 1, lesson number 1, do not accept or make any excuses why you cannot do what God has called you to do. Lesson number 1. Again, Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. That did not stop David from doing what God has called him to do. The same thing, don't think that you don't have enough experience in what it is that God has called you to do. Don't think that you don't know what to do, because the Lord will teach you what it is that you need to know in order to pursue your purpose. Don't think that you have to have umpteenth degrees to do what you need to do, that you're unqualified, you're not educated enough, you don't have the right skin tone, you're not the right gender. None of that matters. Do not accept any excuses on why you can't do what God has called you to do. If God has called you to it, he'll equip you for it. That's lesson number 1. Stone number 1, do not accept any excuses. Stone number 2 can be found in verses 34 through 37. "And David said unto Saul, Thy servant keepeth his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defiled the armies of the living God. David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, the Lord be with thee." Stone number 2, know who your victor is. Know the one that gives you the victory. Know who your victor is. David knew that as he was going to fight this Philistine, he already knew that God has given him victory over the bear and over the lion. And as he's given him victory over the bear and the lion, he knew that this next challenge, regardless how big this challenge was, that God, the same God who was with him in the first 2 challenges, is the same one who's with him now. So regardless of how big the challenges are that before you, your God never changes. Regardless if your situations and circumstances change, the God that is with you, he will never change. Know who your victor is. Always know that God is the one who will give you the victory. Like our pastor taught us already, that God gives us the victory, but we in turn give him the glory. God is not going to share his glory with anyone else. We always thank him and we bless him for the victories that he gives us. Lesson number 2, stone number 2, know who your victor is. Stone number 3 can be found in verses 38 through 39. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put on a helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off of him. Stone number 3, pursue the purpose God has for you, not the ideas that others have for you. Now, it was a good idea for David to go into battle with some armor and with a sword, but it wasn't God's idea. Saul had a great idea. Look, man, you're going into this battle. You're going to need something to protect yourself with. You're going to need something to fight this giant with. Let me give you what it is that I have. The only issue is that there was nothing wrong with Saul's armor. No kinks in it. It worked fine. There was nothing wrong with his sword. The only issue was that it did not fit David's life. It was too heavy. Here you are, I have a shepherd boy trying to wear a grown man's outfit. It was too big for him. He never proved it. That means he wasn't accustomed or he wasn't used to going into any kind of fight with this type of stuff on. He only knew what he had. When he was out in the wilderness, he was fighting the bear and the lion. All he had was a staff. He had a wooden stick. So now you're trying to give a boy a sword that he's never worked with before, and you're trying to give him armor that he's never had before, and you want him to go and use that to fight. If he would have ran towards Goliath with the stuff on, it would have been too heavy. He couldn't. How would he be able to work all this stuff? How could he do it? He can only go into battle with what God has given him. So when you go into battle and when you're going towards your purpose, go towards the purpose that God has given you. People will give you good ideas. Well, you have a degree in this and you're good at that. You're a great singer. You should do this. You should do that. But if it's not a God idea, then it's not a good idea. Only do what God is calling you to do. You'll see the victory in doing what God has called you to do. Is that okay so far? About that? Okay. Stone number 4, lesson 4, can be found in verse 48. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. The word haste means to move or act swiftly or to hurry. So lesson and stone number 5 is run hard after your purpose. Run hard after your purpose. When you know the purpose that God has for you, don't use any excuses then why you can't run towards it. Run hard after it. You have to begin to run in the direction of which God has called you. You have to go. That's the faith walk right there. That's your faith walk. Regardless of what you don't have or regardless of what you do have, don't worry about any of that. You just begin to run in the direction in which God has called you. Run hard after your purpose. David didn't waste any time at all when he went after Goliath. David didn't waste any time even thinking about, what am I going to do when I get there? All he knew is that I'm going to go there. God is calling me in this direction. This is the direction that I'm going to go in. Now, when you go back a little bit to actually verse 46, it says, this day, and this is David talking to Goliath, this day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Now, David told Goliath, I'm going to take your head off of your body. Now, but when David did take Goliath's head off of his body, what did he use? He used Goliath's sword. But prior to that, remember in a couple of verses back where Saul even offered David his armor and his sword. But David didn't take them because he's never used them before. They were too heavy for him. But here it is, a giant whose sword was much bigger than that of Saul. Now, David decided not to take Saul's, but when he got to the giant, he used a larger sword to cut off the enemy's head with. Do not wait until you have everything together and everything that you feel that you need in order to accomplish the purpose that God has called you to. Because when David decided not to take Saul's sword, he ran in the direction of which God has called him, and when he took the stone and slung it and hit Goliath in the head with it, he went on top of Goliath, took Goliath's sword out, and cut his own head off with it, and cut Goliath's head off with it. If he did that with a larger sword, and he neglected to use the sword that Saul gave him, he would have ran toward Goliath. If he had on Saul's armor and Saul's sword, and he would have ran in the direction, it would have been too heavy for him. He would not be able to run fast and get to Goliath like he needed to. It's the same thing with us. If we decide to wait until we have everything together and wait to have all the provision first before we go into the direction of what God has called us, it's going to slow us down. It's going to get us distracted. But if you notice, when it came time for David to cut off Goliath's head, that God provided what he needed when he needed it. He didn't have to have it in the beginning. The first step in David going after his purpose was for David to run in the direction and he needed to go. But when he got there and it was time for him to cut off Goliath's head, there was a sword that was provided for him. Not only was it provided for him, but God gave him the know-how on how to use it when it was time for him to use it. Don't wait until you have everything together, and when you think you have everything together, in order to go forth in the pursuit of what God has called you to do. Stone number 5. And that is right here. Let me turn it over one more time. I'm in the wrong direction. Stone number 5 can be found in verse 52. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou came to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way of Shemarim, even unto Gath and to Ekron. Stone number 5. When you walk in your purpose, you free other people to walk into their purpose. In the very beginning, Saul, being the king and being the leader of this army, he was fearful. Not only was he fearful, but the entire army was fearful of this giant also. But David goes in and handles the problem of the giant. But when David goes into his purpose, then now all of a sudden the other guys, they get courage to go after the Philistines. So when you walk into your purpose and you do what God is calling you to do, it'll free people from the spirit of fear. It'll free them and give them courage to actually go into their purpose also. Amen. Also, let me go back to one more part about stone number 1, which Saul tried to talk David out of fighting Goliath. One more point I wanted to make is that, again, about that spirit of fear. Here it is that Saul and the entire army, they were fearful of Goliath. Here it is, you have David who's coming to say, don't worry about it, I'll go and take care of the situation. The first thing that Saul does, he tries to talk David out of it because he was fearful, so now he's trying to pass his fear down to David. You know, there's a saying that says, misery loves company, but so does fear. That's why it's important for you not to tell everybody what God has called you to do, because everybody's not going to celebrate it. There are some who are going to try to talk you out of it because they're fearful. God may have called you to, start your own business. But you have somebody, well, 27 years ago, I tried to do the same thing. It didn't work for me. But that's you. And that's your belief system, and that's your fear. So don't allow people to talk their fear onto you and to stop you from pursuing and doing what God has called you to do. Quickly, the 5 lessons again, the 5 stones of David. The first one, again, verse 33, do not allow any excuses, and do not allow anyone to speak their fears onto you. Stone number 2, know who your victor is. God is the one who gives the victory, and in turn, you make sure that you give him the glory for that victory. Stone number 3, pursue the purpose that God has for you and not the purpose that other people have for you. Again, if it's not a God idea, then it's not a good idea. Regardless of how good it may sound, and people may try to validate what they're saying to you because you do have this degree and you do have, you sound like this when you sing and you write like this and this, that, and the other. But if God did not call you to that for your purpose, then it's not a good idea. Stone number 4, when David ran hard after Goliath, run hard after your purpose. Once you know what your purpose is, run hard after that. All you have to do is just begin to take the steps in the direction of your purpose. That's that faith walk. And God will supply what's needed when it's time for you to have what you need to continue the purpose that he's called you to. And lastly, goes back to verse 52, and the last stone is that when you walk into your purpose, you help free other people to walk into their purpose also. I pray that it blessed you.